The antiseptic smell hit my nostrils first. Harsh, clinical, inescapable. The rhythmic beeping of machines echoed through my foggy consciousness as I tried to pry my eyelids open. They felt impossibly heavy, like they'd been sewn shut. A dull ache radiated from somewhere in my abdomen, spreading outward with each shallow breath I managed to take. "Ms. Rivera, can you hear me?" A woman's voice, gentle but firm. I felt a cool hand against my wrist, checking my pulse. I struggled to speak, my throat sandpaper dry. "Water," I managed to croak. "Of course," she replied, and moments later, I felt the blessed relief of a straw against my cracked lips. As I sipped, fragments of memory began to assemble themselves. The gallery opening, my paintings, the celebration afterward. Then rain, screeching tires, shattering glass, pain. So much pain. "You were in an accident," the nurse explained, as if reading my scattered thoughts. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. You're at Mercy General. 2 days. My art show, everything I'd worked toward for years, was now a blurry memory, overshadowed by whatever had landed me here. I tried to move, but winced as pain shot through my body. "Try not to move too much," she cautioned. "You have 3 broken ribs, a ruptured spleen they had to remove, and a concussion. You're lucky to be alive, Ms. Rivera." Lucky. The word echoed hollowly in my mind as I took stock of my broken body. My entire life savings had gone into that gallery showing. I had no health insurance, no family to call. The modest sales from my artwork would now vanish into the black hole of medical bills. "Is there someone we can contact for you?" the nurse asked, her face swimming into focus as my vision cleared. Her name tag read, Ellen. She had kind eyes, the crinkled corners suggesting she smiled often. I started to shake my head, but stopped when a stab of pain reminded me of my concussion. "No," I whispered. "There's no one." It was true. Since my mother died 3 years ago, I'd thrown myself into my art, isolating myself from everyone and everything else. My life was a solitary existence of canvas, paint, and occasional catering shifts to pay rent. "You've been saying a name," Ellen said hesitantly, checking something on my chart. "In your sleep. You kept asking for someone. Antonio? Does that ring a bell?" I froze, my breath catching painfully against my broken ribs. How could I possibly have been calling for him? A man I'd only met once, briefly, at the gallery opening. A man whose presence had commanded the entire room without him saying a word. I remembered the moment he'd entered, how the crowd had parted unconsciously, how conversations had hushed. He'd moved with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. Expensive suit, tailored perfectly to broad shoulders, dark eyes that missed nothing. 2 men flanking him, their posture screaming security despite their elegant attire. The gallery owner had rushed to greet him, fawning with a nervous energy I hadn't understood at the time. "Mr. Russo, what an unexpected honor. Are you interested in contemporary art?" "I'm interested in beauty," he'd replied, his voice a low rumble that had somehow carried across the room to where I stood, frozen beside my largest painting. His eyes had found mine then. A moment of connection that had sent an inexplicable shiver down my spine. Throughout the evening, I'd felt his gaze return to me, even as wealthy patrons surrounded him, even as he purchased 3 of my paintings without negotiating the price. Later, as the crowd thinned, he'd approached me, his security maintaining a respectful distance. "Your work speaks of pain," he'd said, no introduction, no small talk. "But there's strength in it too, resilience." I'd been caught off guard, both by his directness and his insight. Most people saw only the vibrant colors in my work, not the darkness beneath. "That's perceptive of you," I'd managed. "I recognize what I understand." His eyes had held mine, and for a moment, I'd felt exposed, as if he could see past my careful facade to the struggles I hid from the world. "Your use of shadow and light, it's not technical skill alone, it's lived experience." When he'd extended his hand, I'd taken it without thinking. "Antonio Russo." His hand had been warm, his grip firm but not overwhelming. "Sofia Rivera," I'd replied. "I know," he'd said with the ghost of a smile. "It's your show." A small, distinguished man had approached then, leaning in to whisper something in Antonio's ear. His expression had hardened momentarily before returning to its unreadable mask. "A pleasure, Ms. Rivera," he'd said, releasing my hand. "I look forward to seeing where your talent takes you." And then he was gone, leaving me with the lingering sensation of his hand against mine, and the strange feeling that something significant had just occurred. I'd thought little of it afterward, too caught up in the success of the evening and the drinks that followed. Until the rain. Until the car that had run the red light as I crossed the street. "Ms. Rivera?" Ellen's voice pulled me back to the present. "Should we contact this Antonio for you?" "No," I said quickly. Too quickly. "I don't even know him. It must have been the medication." Ellen looked unconvinced but didn't press. "All right. The doctor will be in to check on you soon. Try to rest." As she left, I closed my eyes, willing the memories away. What did it mean that I'd been calling for a stranger in my unconscious state? And why him, of all people? I drifted in and out of consciousness throughout the day, vaguely aware of doctors checking my vitals, adjusting medication, discussing my prognosis in hushed tones. Words like extensive internal bleeding and touch and go floated through my haze. Nighttime brought a different nurse, an older woman with efficient hands and a no-nonsense attitude. She helped me sit up slightly to eat a few spoonfuls of bland broth, which was all my stomach could handle. "You had a visitor earlier," she mentioned casually as she checked my IV. "While you were sleeping." My heart stuttered. "A visitor? Who?" She shrugged. "Didn't catch his name. Very well-dressed man. Spoke with the doctor for quite some time. Left those." She nodded toward the window, and for the first time, I noticed an arrangement of white lilies. Elegant, expensive, and filling the sterile room with their subtle fragrance. "There's no card," I said, scanning the flowers. "Some things don't need saying, I suppose," the nurse replied cryptically before dimming the lights. "Try to sleep. Healing happens in the darkness." Sleep came, but with it came dreams. I was back at the gallery, but it was empty except for Antonio and me. He stood before my paintings, his back to me. "Why did you call for me, Sophia?" he asked without turning. Before I could answer, the scene shifted. I was in the street, rain pouring down, headlights bearing down on me, but this time, Antonio was there, pulling me back from the edge of the crosswalk, his arm strong around my waist. "I've got you," he murmured against my hair. "You're safe now." I woke with a gasp, pain shooting through my ribs at the sudden movement. The room was dark except for the muted glow of monitors. According to the clock on the wall, it was just past 3 a.m. A shadow moved near the door. My breath caught as a tall figure stepped into the dim light. Broad shoulders, impeccable suit despite the late hour. Those same intense eyes I remembered from the gallery. Antonio Russo stood at the foot of my bed, watching me with an unreadable expression. "You're awake," he said softly. "How did you know I was here?" My voice was barely a whisper. "I know many things, Sophia." He moved closer, his movements fluid and controlled. "How are you feeling?" The absurdity of the question, posed in a hospital room in the middle of the night by a man I barely knew, struck me, and I almost laughed, stopping only when I remembered my broken ribs. "Like I was hit by a car," I replied dryly. A slight smile curved his lips. "Your spirit remains intact, I see." "Why are you here?" I asked, suddenly acutely aware of my vulnerability, the hospital gown, the tubes, the weakness in my limbs. He studied me for a long moment before answering. "You called for me." A chill ran down my spine. "So I've been told. I don't know why." "Don't you?" He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing against mine on the blanket. Sometimes the unconscious mind recognizes what the conscious one is not ready to admit. Before I could respond, the door opened, and one of the men I recognized from his security detail appeared. "Sir?" he said quietly. "It's time." Antonio nodded, but didn't move immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed a business card on my bedside table. "When you're released, you'll need somewhere to recover, somewhere safe." His eyes held mine, intense and unwavering. "Call this number. Day or night. I don't need charity," I said, a flicker of pride cutting through my confusion. It's not charity, Sophia. It's... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. An investment in your future. Your talent deserves the chance to fully recover. He stepped back, his expression once again unreadable. Rest now. Heal. We'll speak again. As he turned to leave, a thought struck me. The driver, I blurted out. The one who hit me. Did they stop? Was anyone else hurt? Antonio paused at the door, his back to me. The driver has been dealt with. And no one else was injured. He glanced back, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. Some debts cannot go unpaid. With that cryptic statement, he was gone, leaving me alone with the beeping monitors, the fragrant lilies, and the growing certainty that my life had just irrevocably changed. As I drifted back to sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. What could a man like Antonio Russo possibly want from a struggling artist like me, and why, despite every rational thought, did I feel safer knowing he was watching over me? Morning brought a flurry of medical activity. Doctors making rounds, nurses changing IV bags, a physical therapist explaining the long road of recovery ahead of me. Through it all, Antonio's business card sat on my bedside table, a heavy cream rectangle with only a phone number embossed in elegant black script. No name, no company, no address. Just 7 digits that somehow felt like both an escape route and a trap. Your recovery is progressing better than expected, Dr. Chen said, reviewing my chart. Her expression was carefully neutral, but something in her tone caught my attention. The trauma surgeon who operated on you was quite impressed with how quickly additional medical support was arranged. Additional support? I echoed, confused. Dr. Chen glanced around as if ensuring we were alone. Ms. Rivera, when you were brought in, you were critical. The standard protocol was followed, but she hesitated, lowering her voice. Within hours, specialized equipment was delivered. A trauma specialist from Johns Hopkins was flown in for consultation. These things don't typically happen without... She trailed off, clearing her throat. Well, let's just say you've had excellent care. A chill ran through me as I processed her words. Antonio had done this, arranged specialized treatment, brought in experts. But why? And how much power did one man need to have to make such things happen overnight? When can I leave? I asked, suddenly feeling trapped within these walls. Not for at least another week, Dr. Chen replied firmly. Your injuries were severe. You need time to stabilize before even considering discharge. A week confined to this bed, with my thoughts and questions spiraling around me. A week to decide whether to call the number on that card once I was released. The day passed slowly. I dozed, watched mindless television, and tried to ignore the dull, persistent pain that medication only partially dulled. In the afternoon, Ellen returned for her shift. You're looking better today, she remarked, adjusting my pillows. Some color back in your cheeks. Ellen, I began hesitantly. The man who visited, Antonio. Did you call him? She looked surprised. No, honey. Hospital policy is strict about that. We don't contact anyone without patient permission. She busied herself checking the monitors. Though it was strange. Yesterday afternoon, a lawyer came by the nurse's station. Very serious, very formal, said he represented Mr. Russo and needed updates on your condition. She shook her head. Of course, we couldn't give patient information to a third party, but he left contact details for when Ms. Rivera is ready to discuss her care arrangements. Care arrangements. The phrase hung in the air between us. There's something else, Ellen added, her voice dropping to a whisper. There's a man in the waiting area. Has been there since early this morning. Another one by the elevator. Well dressed, but they're not doctors or family of any patients. Security asked, and they said they were ensuring Ms. Rivera's privacy and comfort. My heart raced, setting off a warning beep from the monitor. Easy, Ellen soothed, patting my hand. I shouldn't have upset you. It's just... unusual is all. It's fine, I managed, forcing myself to breathe evenly. I'm just tired. After Ellen left, I lay back against the pillows, mind racing. Antonio wasn't just keeping tabs on me. He was having me guarded. But from what? Or from whom? As evening fell, I noticed a small duffel bag had appeared on the chair beside my bed. Inside, I found toiletries, a pair of soft pajamas, underwear in my exact size, and my sketchbook and charcoals from my apartment. A note was tucked inside. You mentioned once that you never go a day without drawing. I hadn't mentioned that to him. I hadn't mentioned much of anything during our brief interaction at the gallery, which meant he'd either researched me or had someone enter my apartment. Both possibilities sent a shiver down my spine, not entirely from fear. That night, I dreamed of hands. Strong hands pulling me from wreckage, gentle hands brushing hair from my face. Dangerous hands that had dealt with the driver who hit me. I woke breathless, the pain in my ribs sharp and insistent. The next few days established a routine. Physical therapy in the mornings, rest in the afternoons, and quiet evenings with my sketchbook. Antonio didn't return, but his presence remained, in the fresh flowers delivered daily, in the men who kept watch outside, in the specialized care I continued to receive. On the 5th day, I was permitted to walk the hallway. As I shuffled past the waiting area, leaning heavily on a walker, I saw him. One of Antonio's men, the one who had come to the door that night in my hospital room. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, pretending to be engrossed in a magazine. I know you're watching me, I said, stopping before him. You can tell Antonio that if he has something to say, he should come say it himself. The man, younger than I'd initially thought, perhaps early 30s, looked startled at being addressed directly. He glanced around before responding. Mr. Russo is respecting your space, Ms. Rivera, he said quietly. He wished to ensure your comfort without imposing his presence. And who exactly are you? Marco, he replied. I'm Mr. Russo's associate. Well, Marco, I said, gripping my walker tightly as pain flared in my abdomen. You can tell your boss that having strangers monitor my every move isn't exactly comfortable. Marco stood, concern crossing his features as he noticed my pallor. You should return to your room. You're overexerting yourself. I'm fine, I insisted, though my legs had begun to shake with the effort of standing. Ms. Rivera, Marco said gently, Mr. Russo would be displeased if your recovery were compromised. Please. Something in his tone, a hint of genuine worry rather than mere obligation, made me relent. As I turned to shuffle back to my room, Marco spoke again. He asks about you, every hour, on the hour. A pause. I've never seen him so concerned about anyone. I didn't respond, but his words followed me back to my room, settling into my thoughts like stones in still water. That night, I couldn't sleep. Questions plagued me, spinning through my mind on endless loop. Who was Antonio Russo really? What did he want from me? Why had I called for him in my unconscious state? And most disturbing of all, why did I feel this inexplicable pull toward a man who clearly lived in a world of power and danger far removed from my own? Just after midnight, my phone rang, the hospital phone that had remained silent until now. Hello? I answered cautiously. Sophia. His voice, low and resonant, sent an involuntary shiver through me. I'm told you spoke with Marco today. And of course he knew. I did. And that you're pushing yourself too hard in physical therapy. I bristled at that. I'm trying to recover, to get out of here. To what end, Sophia? His question cut through my defenses. Where will you go? Your apartment building doesn't have an elevator. You can't manage 4 flights of stairs in your condition. You can't work. Your medical bills. Stop, I interrupted, anger flaring hot and sudden. You don't know anything about me or my situation. A pause. I know that your mother died of cancer 3 years ago, leaving you alone except for a distant cousin in Arizona whom you rarely speak to. I know you work catering jobs to supplement your meager art sales. I know your landlord raised your rent last month, and you were considering moving before your gallery showing. I know the driver who hit you was texting his girlfriend and ran a red light at 40 miles per hour. His voice hardened. I know everything I need to know, Sophia. I clutched the phone tighter, my knuckles white. Why? Why go to all this trouble for someone you met once? The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Do you believe in fate, Sophia? He finally asked, his voice softer. No, I replied honestly. I believe in consequences, actions and reactions. Then consider this. The action was my seeing your paintings, seeing you at that gallery. Everything that has followed is simply the reaction. That's not an answer, I pressed. It's the only one I can offer right now. Another pause. You'll be discharged in 2 days. A decision will need to be made. The card on my bedside table seemed to grow heavier, more significant. And if I don't call that number, then my men will withdraw. The additional medical support will continue. That's already been arranged and paid for. You'll be free to struggle up those stairs to your apartment, alone. The way he said, alone, as if it were the most tragic state imaginable, struck a chord within me. Why did I call for you? I whispered, voicing the question that had haunted me since waking. When I was unconscious, why was it your name on my lips? I heard him inhale slowly. Perhaps because on some level, you recognized what I recognized the moment I saw you, Sophia. His voice dropped lower, intimate in the darkness of my room. That you and I are the same. I'm nothing like you, I protested automatically. Aren't you? A hint of amusement colored his tone. Survivor? Fighter? Someone who creates beauty from darkness. Someone who stands alone. His words resonated with uncomfortable truth. Before I could form a response, he continued. Rest now. We'll speak again when you're discharged. The line went dead, leaving me with only the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the weight of his words. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, a severe-looking woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. Ms. Rivera, she said, not bothering to introduce herself as she entered my room. I understand you'll be discharged tomorrow. Who are you? I asked, immediately wary. Francesca Vitale. I manage Mr. Russo's household affairs. She placed a sleek leather portfolio on the bed tray. These are the discharge arrangements. A private ambulance will transport you to the recovery facility. Your personal belongings have already been packed and will be stored securely until you're well enough to make more permanent arrangements. I stared at her in disbelief. Excuse me? I haven't agreed to any of this. Francesca raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. Mr. Russo seemed to think you'd be amenable. Well, Mr. Russo is mistaken, I replied, pushing the portfolio away. I make my own decisions. A flicker of what might have been respect crossed her features. I see. She straightened, adjusting her jacket. In that case, I'll leave these materials for your review. The offer stands until noon tomorrow. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Ms. Rivera, I've worked for Antonio Russo for 15 years. In that time, I've never seen him extend this kind of consideration to anyone. I suggest you think carefully before rejecting it. After she left, I opened the portfolio, curiosity overcoming my indignation. Inside were photos of a beautiful modern building with extensive gardens, along with medical credentials for a full staff of private nurses and therapists. According to the documentation, I would have a private suite for the duration of recovery, with all medical expenses and living costs covered. It was tempting. So tempting it frightened me. The alternative was my 4th-floor walk-up, struggling alone through a painful recovery, draining what little savings I had on basic necessities while unable to work. But nothing came without strings, especially not from a man like Antonio Russo. That afternoon, I asked Ellen about him, trying to sound casual. That man who visited me, Antonio Russo. Do you know who he is? Ellen's expression changed subtly. I shouldn't gossip about visitors. Please, I pressed. I need to know. She glanced toward the door before leaning closer. I don't know details, but there are rumors. The name Russo is significant in certain circles. Old money, powerful connections. She hesitated. Some say not all those connections are strictly legitimate, but that's just hospital gossip. It confirmed what I'd suspected from the moment he'd walked into my gallery. Antonio Russo was dangerous. The kind of man whose mere presence changed the atmosphere of a room. The kind of man who could arrange specialized medical equipment overnight. The kind of man who dealt with problems permanently. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I picked up my sketchbook, charcoal moving across paper almost of its own accord. Without conscious decision, Antonio's face emerged from the shadows. Those intense eyes, the strong line of his jaw, the subtle curve of his mouth that suggested he rarely smiled, but when he did, it meant something. I'd nearly finished the drawing when a soft knock came at my door. Marco entered, his expression grave. "Ms. Rivera," he said quietly, "there's been a situation. Mr. Russo believes it's best if you're moved tonight, rather than waiting for tomorrow's discharge." Alarm shot through me. What kind of situation? Marco's eyes shifted away. "It's just a precaution. The car is waiting downstairs. Dr. Chen has approved an early discharge." My instincts screamed danger. But from which direction? From whatever situation had prompted this midnight evacuation? Or from Antonio himself? "I haven't decided yet," I protested. "I haven't called the number." Marco's expression softened slightly. "Sometimes, Ms. Rivera, the decision is made for us by circumstances beyond our control." He gestured to the duffel bag, now repacked with my few possessions. "Please. Mr. Russo insists on your safety." As if to punctuate his words, the hallway lights flickered momentarily. In the distance, I heard raised voices and hurried footsteps. I looked down at the sketch in my lap. Antonio's face staring back at me with an intensity that seemed to transcend paper and charcoal. Then, I looked at Marco, at the concern evident in his eyes, at the hand he now extended toward me. "All right," I said, closing my sketchbook. "I'll go." The journey from hospital to sanctuary passed in a blur of pain medication and anxiety. Marco helped me into a wheelchair. A nurse quickly disconnected my IV, and suddenly I was being whisked through back corridors of the hospital, avoiding the main exits. The sleek black SUV waiting at a service entrance had windows so darkly tinted they were nearly opaque. Two men I hadn't seen before flanked the vehicle, their watchful eyes scanning the surroundings continuously. "What's happening?" I asked Marco, as he carefully helped me into the back seat. "Why all the secrecy? Mr. Russo prefers to be cautious," he replied, his tone revealing nothing as he slid in beside me. The vehicle immediately pulled away, its powerful engine a quiet purr beneath us. Through the medication haze, I tried to keep track of our route, but the driver took so many turns, doubling back and changing direction seemingly at random, that I soon lost all sense of orientation. We drove for what felt like hours, but might have been only 40 minutes. Finally, we passed through an ornate iron gate, following a winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured trees. The house, no, mansion, that came into view was not the modern building from Francesca's portfolio. This was older, stately, a sprawling estate of stone and dark wood set back from the road, and surrounded by extensive gardens, now shadowy in the pre-dawn light. "This isn't the recovery facility," I said, my voice thin with exhaustion and confusion. Marco hesitated. "Plans changed. This is Mr. Russo's private residence. It's the most secure location available." Secure. The word hung between us, laden with implications I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. The car stopped at a side entrance, where Francesca waited, her rigid posture unchanged despite the late hour. She nodded curtly to Marco before turning her attention to me. "Ms. Rivera, your suite is prepared. The night nurse is on duty and will help you settle in." Too tired to argue or question further, I allowed myself to be transferred back to a wheelchair and guided into the house. The interior was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, rich wood paneling, tasteful art adorning the walls. Not ostentatious, but quietly, unmistakably expensive. We passed through a series of hallways before reaching what appeared to be a separate wing of the mansion. Francesca opened double doors to reveal a spacious suite that looked more like a luxury hotel than a sick room. A large bed with crisp white linens dominated one wall. Floor-to-ceiling windows, currently covered with heavy drapes, lined another. A sitting area, a desk, and several bookcases completed the main room. Two doors led off to what I presumed were a bathroom and closet. A petite woman in nurse's scrubs approached, her warm smile a stark contrast to Francesca's frosty demeanor. "Ms. Rivera, I'm Lily. I'll be your night nurse while you're recovering here." Francesca excused herself with a curt nod, and Marco lingered only long enough to ensure I was settled before withdrawing as well, leaving me alone with Lily, who efficiently helped me change into fresh pajamas and settled me into the impossibly comfortable bed. "You must have many questions," Lily said as she checked my vitals. but they can wait until morning. You need rest now." "Is he here?" I asked, unable to stop myself. "Antonio?" A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, crossed Lily's features. "Mr. Russo is away on business. He's expected back tomorrow." She adjusted my pillows. "There's a call button here if you need anything during the night. I'll be in the adjoining room." After she left, I lay awake despite my exhaustion, taking in my new surroundings. The room was beautiful, comfortable, and utterly foreign, like being in a luxurious cage. I tried to sort through the tangle of emotions: gratitude for the care, fear of the unknown, and an unsettling anticipation at the thought of seeing Antonio again. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me, and I fell into a dreamless sleep. Morning brought sunshine streaming through a gap in the curtains, and a different nurse, an older man with kind eyes and efficient hands, who introduced himself as James. He helped me to the adjoining bathroom, which was larger than my entire apartment, and featured a walk-in shower with a built-in bench and handrails. "Mr. Russo had these installed yesterday," James explained, noting my surprise at the medical accommodations within the otherwise luxurious space. "He was quite specific about making sure everything was accessible for you." After a careful shower that left me feeling human again for the first time in days, James helped me dress in soft cotton pants and a loose blouse that somehow fit perfectly. Another of Antonio's mysterious arrangements, I assumed. Breakfast arrived on a tray: fresh fruit, yogurt, toast, and tea, served on fine china that probably cost more than a month's rent on my apartment. "Will Antonio, Mr. Russo, be here today?" I asked James as he checked my medication. "He should return this afternoon," James replied. "In the meantime, he thought you might like to see this." He crossed to the heavy drapes and pulled them open to reveal a breathtaking view. The windows overlooked meticulously landscaped gardens that stretched toward a small lake in the distance. The morning sun glinted off the water, and a stone path wound through flower beds and sculpted hedges. "Once you've rested this morning, we could try a short walk in the garden," James suggested. "Fresh air would do you good, and Dr. Whitman, your new physician, will be here at noon to assess your progress." The morning passed in a haze of medical examinations and cautious physical therapy. Dr. Whitman, a distinguished older man with silver hair and a gentle manner, seemed impressed with my progress. "The initial trauma was severe," he explained as he checked my healing incisions, "but you're young and remarkably resilient. With proper care and rehabilitation, I expect a full recovery within 2 to 3 months. 2 to 3 months. The reality of my situation hit me anew. 2 to 3 months in this beautiful prison, dependent on the mysterious generosity of a man I barely knew. "Dr. Whitman," I began hesitantly, "do you know why Mr. Russo is doing this? Providing all this care for someone he hardly knows?" The doctor's expression remained professionally neutral. "I don't question Mr. Russo's motives, Ms. Rivera. I simply provide the best medical care possible to my patients." He packed his bag and stood. "I'll return in 3 days to check your progress." After a light lunch, James helped me into a wheelchair for my promised garden excursion. The air outside was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. The garden was even more beautiful up close. A carefully designed landscape of formal beds near the house, gradually giving way to more natural arrangements further from the building. James pushed me along the stone path, pointing out various plants and features. I found myself relaxing slightly, the tension of the past week easing in the peaceful surroundings. "Who maintains all this?" I asked, gesturing to the immaculate grounds. "Mr. Russo employs a team of gardeners," James replied. "But the design was his own. He's quite knowledgeable about horticulture. Something of a personal passion, I understand." It was a strangely humanizing detail about a man who had seemed so detached and mysterious. I tried to picture Antonio Russo planning flower beds and selecting plantings, his hands in the earth instead of directing his empire from afar. As we rounded a bend in the path, a structure came into view near the lake, a glass-walled studio, sunlight streaming through its transparent walls. "What's that building?" I asked, intrigued by its modern design, so different from the main house. James hesitated. "That's Mr. Russo's private retreat. He doesn't allow visitors there." I studied the distant structure. Curiosity piqued. What would a man like Antonio Russo need to retreat from? And what did he do in that solitary glass box? We had turned back toward the house when I spotted a car approaching on the driveway. A sleek black sedan, different from the SUV that had brought me here. "Mr. Russo has returned," James remarked, noticing the direction of my gaze. My heart rate quickened, betraying an anticipation I didn't want to acknowledge. James must have sensed my sudden tension. "Perhaps we should return to your suite," he suggested. "You shouldn't overexert yourself on your first day." But it was too late for retreat. The sedan had stopped, and Antonio emerged, speaking briefly to the driver before turning toward us. Even at a distance, his presence was commanding. Tall, broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed in a dark suit. He said something to another man who had exited the car behind him, then started walking in our direction, his stride purposeful. I straightened in the wheelchair, suddenly acutely aware of my casual clothes, my hair still damp from the shower, my face free of makeup. James had stopped pushing, waiting respectfully as Antonio approached. When he reached us, Antonio's dark eyes found mine immediately, assessing, searching for something I couldn't name. "Sophia," he said, my name somehow different in his voice. "You're looking better." "Hard not to, compared to a hospital bed," I replied, aiming for lightness but hearing the tension in my own voice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Indeed." He turned to James. "I'll take Ms. Rivera from here. You're relieved for the afternoon." James nodded and stepped away from the wheelchair. "Don't forget your medication at 4, Ms. Rivera," he said, before walking back toward the house. Antonio moved behind me, taking the handles of the wheelchair with a casual confidence that suggested he was not unaccustomed to the task. "Do you mind?" he asked, already beginning to push me along the path, this time toward the lake rather than the house. Would it matter if I did? The question slipped out before I could censor it. He stopped, coming around to face me. "Yes," he said simply. "It would." Something in his direct gaze made me believe him. I nodded, and he resumed our journey, guiding the wheelchair along the path with surprising gentleness. We moved in silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of gravel beneath the wheels and distant bird song. Finally he spoke. "The situation at the hospital," he began, "has been resolved. But it confirmed my suspicion that you weren't safe there." "What exactly was this situation?" I asked. Marco wouldn't tell me. Antonio was quiet for a moment, as if weighing how much to share. "There are people who would use anyone connected to me as leverage," he said finally. "Someone became aware of my interest in your welfare. A chill ran through me despite the warm sunshine. Connected to you? I barely know you." He stopped the wheelchair at a small pavilion overlooking the lake. Coming around to face me again, he crouched down, bringing himself to my eye level, a gesture that felt both intimate and surprisingly respectful. "Perception creates its own reality, Sophia," he said quietly. "The moment I visited you in that hospital room, the moment I arranged for your care, a connection was established in the eyes of certain individuals. Whether we acknowledge it or not is irrelevant. So I'm in danger because of you," I said, the realization landing like a stone in still water. "You're safe because of me," he corrected, his gaze unwavering. "Here. In this house. Under my protection." "For how long?" I asked, the question encompassing far more than just my recovery period. "As long as necessary." He stood, moving to the railing of the pavilion, his back to me as he gazed out over the water. "I owe you that much." "You don't owe me anything," I insisted. "We met once briefly at my gallery opening. Why would you feel any obligation toward me?" He turned back, his expression unreadable. "The accident wasn't random, Sophia." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" "The driver who hit you, he was paid to do it." Antonio's voice had hardened, a dangerous edge beneath the controlled surface. "It was meant as a message to me." "I don't understand," I said, my mind reeling. "Why would anyone—" "Because I showed interest in you," he interrupted. "Because for the first time in years, I allowed myself to be seen caring about something. Someone." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of agitation. "It was my fault. I was careless." I struggled to process his words. You're saying I was hit by a car because you bought some paintings at my gallery? A bitter smile touched his lips. My world operates by different rules, Sophia. Any perceived attachment becomes a vulnerability to be exploited. He moved closer again, his eyes intent on mine. I never intended to drag you into this life. After the gallery, I meant to keep my distance. But then I received that call from the hospital. What call? I asked, confused. You don't remember, he said. Not a question, but a statement. You were barely conscious. You'd lost so much blood the doctors weren't certain you'd survive the night. Something raw flashed in his eyes. Somehow you got hold of a nurse's phone. You called my private number, a number that had never been given to you. You said my name, and that you needed me. Then you lost consciousness again. I stared at him in disbelief. That's impossible. I couldn't have known your number, and yet you did. He held my gaze, intensity radiating from him in almost palpable waves. Some connections transcend explanation, Sophia. The implication hung in the air between us. Something mystical, fated, beyond rational understanding. But I'd never believed in destiny or supernatural bonds. There must be a logical explanation, I insisted. Maybe I heard your number somewhere at the gallery. Maybe. Does the explanation matter? He cut in. Whatever the reason, you called. I came, and now we're here. Put that way, it seemed simple. But nothing about this situation, or this man, was simple. Why did you really bring me here, Antonio? I asked, suddenly tired of half-truths and veiled motivations. What do you want from me? For a long moment, he was silent, his dark eyes studying my face as if memorizing every detail. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost vulnerable. In my world, Sophia, trust is a luxury I cannot afford. Relationships are transactions. Loyalty is purchased rather than earned. He paused, choosing his words carefully. When I saw your artwork, when I saw you, I recognized something I thought lost to me. Authenticity, truth rendered in color and shadow. He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Subtle, expensive, with notes of cedar, and something darker beneath. What do I want? He repeated my question. I want to know if what I sensed that night was real. I want to understand how a stranger could call out to me in her darkest moment. I want... He hesitated, as if the admission cost him something valuable. To feel something genuine again. The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Whatever I'd expected. Some calculation, some agenda. This vulnerable confession wasn't it. Before I could respond, his phone vibrated. He checked it, his expression immediately shifting back to the controlled mask I'd first encountered. I need to take this, he said, already stepping away. James will return you to your suite. Rest, Sophia. We'll continue our conversation at dinner. As if summoned by some invisible signal, James appeared at the entrance to the pavilion. Antonio nodded to him, then to me, before walking swiftly back toward the house, already speaking in low tones into his phone. As James wheeled me back along the garden path, I tried to reconcile the different versions of Antonio Russo I'd encountered. The powerful, dangerous man who commanded respect without effort, the meticulous guardian who arranged every detail of my care, and now, the solitary figure who spoke of trust as a luxury beyond his reach. Which one was real? Perhaps all of them. Perhaps none. One thing was certain. I was now irrevocably entangled in his world, for better or worse. And some part of me, a part I wasn't ready to examine too closely, didn't want to escape. Dinner with Antonio was an unexpectedly intimate affair. I'd anticipated a formal dining room with excessive silverware and uncomfortable silence. Instead, James helped me dress in a simple but elegant black dress that had mysteriously appeared in the closet, then escorted me to a private terrace adjoining Antonio's study. A small table had been set for two, candlelight flickering against the darkening sky. Antonio stood as I approached, his eyes taking in my appearance with undisguised appreciation. You look beautiful, he said simply, coming around to help me into my chair despite James's presence. The meal was exquisite, delicate flavors served on fine china, wine poured into crystal glasses. We ate in companionable silence at first, the tension between us neither uncomfortable nor easily defined. Your home is remarkable, I said finally, looking out across the gardens, now illuminated by subtle landscape lighting. Have you lived here long? It belonged to my father, Antonio replied, his expression giving away nothing. I inherited it 10 years ago. And your father, is he dead? Antonio said flatly, along with my mother and younger brother. The bluntness of his statement caught me off guard. I'm sorry, I offered, unsure what else to say. Antonio took a sip of wine, his eyes distant. It was a long time ago, but not long enough, I sensed, to have healed whatever wounds their deaths had left. I thought of my own mother, how even 3 years later, the pain of her loss could still steal my breath without warning. My mother died of cancer, I said quietly. It was just the two of us for most of my life. I know. At my startled look, he added, as I said, I make it my business to know everything about the people in my life. Is that what I am now? I asked. Someone in your life? His dark eyes held mine across the table. You're here, aren't you? Before I could respond, the quiet dinner was interrupted by the arrival of Francesca. She approached with controlled urgency, bending to whisper something in Antonio's ear. His expression hardened immediately, the warmth I'd glimpsed vanishing behind a mask of cold authority. Excuse me, he said, rising from the table. There's a matter that requires my attention. He followed Francesca inside, leaving me alone on the terrace. Through the glass doors, I could see them in his study. Antonio taking a phone call, his posture tense, his free hand clenching into a fist at his side. Francesca stood nearby, her face impassive as she waited for instructions. I couldn't hear their conversation, but the change in Antonio was palpable even at a distance. This was a different man than the one who had spoken to me so openly in the garden pavilion. This was someone dangerous, someone accustomed to power and its ruthless application. A few minutes later, he returned to the terrace, his expression carefully controlled once more. I apologize for the interruption, he said, resuming his seat. Business doesn't respect dinner hours. What kind of business? I asked, suddenly needing to know exactly who I was dealing with. Antonio studied me for a moment before answering. I have interests in real estate, shipping, and private equity. My family has been influential in this city for generations. That's not what I'm asking, I pressed, surprising myself with my boldness. Who are you really, Antonio? What are you involved in that puts people like me in danger just by association? Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Not anger directed at me, but a coldness that spoke of violence held carefully in check. Are you certain you want those answers, Sophia? His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but with steel beneath. Some knowledge cannot be unlearned. I thought of the hospital, of the midnight evacuation, of the men who constantly guarded the property. I thought of his cryptic words about the driver who hit me being dealt with. In that moment, I realized I had already crossed a threshold, willingly or not, into Antonio's world. Yes, I said firmly. I want the truth. He nodded once, as if my answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. My family has controlled certain aspects of this city's economy for 3 generations. Some of our businesses are entirely legitimate. Others operate in grayer areas. You're talking about organized crime, I said, the words hanging in the air between us. A crude term, but essentially accurate. His gaze remained steady, watching for my reaction. I inherited not only my father's businesses, but his enemies. The accident that nearly killed you was orchestrated by a rival family, the Costellos. They've been trying to encroach on my territory for years. Despite suspecting something along these lines, hearing it confirmed sent a chill through me. I was dining with a man who was essentially a mob boss, a man whose world operated by rules of power, violence, and retribution. The driver, I said slowly. When you said he was dealt with, he's alive, Antonio replied, correctly interpreting my unspoken question. Though he may wish otherwise, he was merely a pawn. Punishing him severely would have accomplished nothing. The message needed to be sent higher. The casual way he spoke of punishment and messages sent a shiver down my spine. Yet, strangely, I wasn't afraid. Not for myself, at least. Something about Antonio's presence conveyed absolute certainty that he would never harm me. Why tell me all this? I asked, Why not maintain the facade of a legitimate businessman? Because I want your trust, he said simply. And trust requires truth, however uncomfortable. Even if that truth could implicate me, make me an accessory to whatever retribution you took against the Castellos? A shadow of a smile touched his lips. You have a sharp mind, Sophia. Yes, even then. I'm offering you knowledge with all its burdens. What you choose to do with it is your decision. I considered his words, turning them over in my mind. So what happens now? Am I your prisoner here? Your guest? Your what, exactly? Antonio leaned forward, his intense gaze capturing mine. You are under my protection. Beyond that. He hesitated, and I realized this powerful, dangerous man was actually uncertain. Beyond that is for you to determine. The admission of choice, of agency in a situation where I'd felt increasingly powerless, caught me off guard. Before I could respond, a sharp pain lanced through my side, a reminder of still healing injuries. I winced, unable to hide my discomfort. Antonio was immediately alert. You've overexerted yourself. You should rest. As if on cue, James appeared at the terrace door. Antonio stood, coming around to help me from my chair with a gentleness that belied his dangerous reputation. We'll continue this conversation when you're stronger, he said, his hand warm against the small of my back as he guided me toward James. Sleep well, Sophia. That night, alone in my luxurious suite, I lay awake thinking about Antonio's revelations. I should have been terrified, should have been planning my escape from this beautiful prison and the dangerous man who ruled it. Instead, I found myself drawn to his complexity, the ruthless power tempered with unexpected vulnerability, the criminal overlord who spoke of trust and truth as if they were precious artifacts from a lost civilization. Morning brought a visit from Dr. Whitman, who seemed pleased with my progress, but cautioned against overexertion. Your body has suffered significant trauma, he reminded me. Recovery cannot be rushed. After he left, I convinced James to let me sit in the garden rather than remain confined to my suite. He wheeled me to a shaded bench near a fountain, providing me with a sketchbook and pencils before retreating to a respectful distance. I began to draw, letting my hand move across the paper without conscious direction. The peaceful gurgle of the fountain, the scent of roses, the dappled sunlight through the trees, all of it seeped into my awareness, gradually relaxing the tension I'd carried since waking in the hospital. I was so absorbed in my sketching that I didn't notice Antonio's approach until his shadow fell across my paper. I looked up, startled, to find him standing before me, dressed more casually than I'd seen before, in dark trousers and a white shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. You're talented, he said, nodding toward my sketch, which I realized with a start was a detailed rendering of the glass studio by the lake. Thank you, I replied, suddenly self-conscious. Your garden is inspiring. May I? He gestured to the space beside me on the bench. I nodded, and he sat, careful to maintain a respectful distance. For a moment, we simply existed in companionable silence, watching the play of light on water in the fountain. I've been thinking about our conversation last night, he said finally. About what happens next. I turned to face him, struck again by the intensity of his dark eyes, the controlled power in his posture. And? I prompted when he didn't continue, and I find myself at a crossroads I never anticipated. He looked down at his hands, strong hands that I suspected had both created and destroyed. I built my life around control, Sophia. Every variable accounted for, every outcome planned. Then you appeared, and suddenly what? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes met mine again, something raw and honest in their depths. Suddenly, I find myself hoping for things I have no right to hope for. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that gradually became familiar, morning physical therapy sessions with James, afternoons in the garden sketching or reading books from Antonio's extensive library, evenings often spent in his company, sometimes dining together, sometimes simply sitting in companionable silence as he worked, and I drew. Antonio was frequently absent during the day, attending to business I deliberately didn't ask about. But he always returned by evening, and I came to anticipate the moment when he would appear in the garden or on the terrace, his presence bringing a strange sense of both tension and ease. We spoke of many things during those evening hours: art and literature, my childhood with a single mother struggling to make ends meet, his more privileged but emotionally barren upbringing. He told me about his younger brother Marco, killed alongside his parents, and how he'd named his most trusted lieutenant after him. He described his father's unyielding expectations, his mother's distant elegance. I shared stories of my mother's warmth, her encouragement of my artistic pursuits despite our financial struggles, her slow decline as cancer consumed her. What we didn't discuss was the growing connection between us, the way his hand would linger when helping me stand, the way I found myself sketching his face from memory when alone, the charged silence that sometimes fell between us, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Nor did we discuss the future, what would happen when I was fully healed, whether I would return to my old life or if such a return was even possible. The danger from the Costellos remained unresolved, hovering like a storm cloud on the horizon of our fragile peace. On the morning marking 1 month since the accident, Dr. Whitman declared me well enough to move without the wheelchair. "Short distances only," he cautioned, "and always with someone nearby in case you need support." That evening, I was sitting in what had become my usual spot in the garden when Antonio appeared, a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses in his hands. "James told me the good news," he said, settling beside me on the bench. "I thought we might celebrate your progress." He poured the champagne with elegant efficiency, handing me a flute of the sparkling liquid. Our fingers brushed in the exchange, sending a now familiar warmth through me. "To healing," he said, raising his glass. "To healing," I echoed, though we both knew we were talking about more than just my physical recovery. We sipped in comfortable silence, watching as the setting sun painted the garden in shades of gold and amber. When Antonio spoke again, his voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking about your artwork, Sophia. The pieces I purchased from your gallery showing—" "What about them?" I asked, curious about this unexpected topic. "They're extraordinary, raw and honest in a way that's rare." He turned to face me fully. "You shouldn't be working catering jobs to survive. Your talent deserves recognition." I laughed softly, without humor. "The struggling artist is a cliché for a reason, Antonio. Talent doesn't pay the bills." "It could," he said simply. "I have connections in the art world, legitimate ones," he added with a hint of wry amusement. "One call from me to the right people, and you'd have exhibitions in galleries across the country." I stiffened, placing my glass carefully on the bench between us. "I don't want your charity or your influence. My work should stand on its own merits." "It would," he insisted. "I wouldn't be suggesting this otherwise. All I'd be doing is opening doors. Your talent would do the rest." "And what would you want in return?" I challenged, suddenly wary. "Everything has a price in your world, doesn't it?" A flash of hurt crossed his face before his expression shuddered. "Is that what you think of me still? That every gesture is a transaction?" Shame washed through me at the genuine pain in his voice. After a month in his home, experiencing his care and protection, I should have known better. "No," I admitted quietly. "That's not what I think. I'm sorry." He was silent for a long moment, staring out at the darkening garden. "When this began," he said finally, "when I received that call from the hospital, I told myself I was acting out of obligation, that I owed you protection because my enemies had targeted you to get to me." He turned back to me, his dark eyes intense in the fading light. "But that was a lie I told myself, Sophia. The truth is far simpler and far more complicated. From the moment I saw you at that gallery, standing beside your paintings with defiance and vulnerability in equal measure, I was drawn to you in a way I've never experienced." My breath caught at his confession. "Antonio, let me finish," he said gently. "I've spent my life building walls, Sophia, protecting myself, my business, my people. I don't know any other way to exist. But with you—" He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and when I didn't, he brushed his fingers lightly against my cheek. "With you, I find myself wanting to tear those walls down." The intensity in his eyes, the tenderness in his touch, it was overwhelming. Part of me wanted to flee from the vulnerability of the moment, from the enormity of what he was offering. But a stronger part, a part that had been awakening since that first night in the hospital, wanted to step forward into the unknown territory of his embrace. "I'm afraid," I whispered, the admission costing me. "Of me?" he asked, his hand falling away. "Of this," I clarified, gesturing between us. "Of wanting something I shouldn't want. Someone I shouldn't want." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Because of who I am, what I am. Yes. There was no point denying it. "Your world is dangerous, Antonio. Violent. How could anything good grow in such soil?" He was silent for a long moment, considering my words with the seriousness they deserved. "For generations, my family has lived by certain codes, operated within certain boundaries," he said finally. "I inherited that legacy, along with all its burdens and contradictions. But inheritance isn't destiny, Sophia." He stood, extending his hand to help me up. "Come. There's something I want to show you." Curious despite my reservations, I placed my hand in his and allowed him to guide me slowly along the garden path. We walked in silence toward the lake, my steps still careful but steadier than they had been. As we approached the glass studio I'd sketched so many times from a distance, I realized our destination. "Your private retreat," I said, remembering James's words about Antonio not allowing visitors there. "Yes." He withdrew a key from his pocket and unlocked the door. "No one else has been inside, not even Francesca." He opened the door and gestured for me to enter. Stepping inside, I froze in astonishment. The space was filled with light and color. Not the office or meditation space I'd imagined, but an artist's studio. Easels held half-completed canvases. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with paints, brushes, and other supplies. A large work table occupied the center of the room, scattered with sketches and reference materials. "You're an artist," I breathed, turning to him in wonder. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not a very good one, I'm afraid. But yes, this has been my sanctuary since I was a boy. The one place where I could escape my father's expectations, where I could create rather than destroy." I moved deeper into the space, drawn to the canvases. His style was different from mine, more controlled, more classical in technique, but there was genuine talent evident in the work. Landscapes mostly, rendered with a precision that spoke of years of practice. "These are beautiful," I said honestly. "They're technically adequate," he replied with a self-deprecating shrug. "But they lack what your work has: soul, authenticity. I paint what I see. You paint what you feel." I turned back to him, struck by the vulnerability in his admission. This powerful, dangerous man had just shared his most private self with me. Not the Mafia boss, not the businessman, but the artist who doubted his own creative vision. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked softly. He moved closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "Because I want you to understand that there's more to me than the world I was born into. That I'm capable of creation, not just destruction." His voice dropped lower, intimate in the quiet space. "Because I'm offering you a choice, Sophia." "What choice?" My heart thundered in my chest, already knowing the answer. "Stay," he said simply. "Not as my guest or my patient, not as someone under my protection, but as—" he hesitated, searching for the right words. "As my partner, in whatever form that might take." The magnitude of what he was offering, not just a relationship, but entry into his closely guarded private life, left me breathless. "And if I say no, if I choose to leave, then you leave," he said, though I could see the cost of those words in his eyes. "I'll ensure you're set up comfortably, safely, away from any danger associated with me. You'd never have to see me again." I studied his face in the fading evening light that streamed through the glass walls, the strong lines of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes, the vulnerability he was allowing me to see beneath his carefully controlled exterior. "And what about your enemies?" I asked. "The Costellos? Would they ever truly leave me alone?" A shadow crossed his face. "That situation has been addressed during your recovery. There was a meeting of the families. Certain arrangements were made." He stepped closer. "You would be safe, Sophia, whether with me or without me." The implication of his words, that he had negotiated some kind of peace, potentially at great cost to himself, to ensure my safety regardless of my choice, struck me deeply. This was no small gesture from a man in his position. "And if I stay?" I whispered. "If you stay," he said softly, reaching out to take my hands in his. "We build something new together, something that honors who we both are, without erasing our pasts or pretending the complications don't exist." His thumbs traced gentle patterns on my palms. "I can't promise you a perfect life, Sophia. My world will always have elements of danger, of compromise. But I can promise you this, with you, I want to be a better man than I was made to be." In that moment, looking into his eyes, I saw the truth of his words. This was a man capable of violence and ruthlessness, yes, but also of tenderness, of growth, of love. A man fighting against the destiny that had been laid out for him since birth, reaching for something more. And I realized that I, too, was reaching for something more. The safe, solitary life I'd built for myself after my mother's death, was that really living, or just surviving? Slowly, deliberately, I closed the distance between us. "I want to stay," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "Not because I need your protection or your connections, but because when I'm with you, I feel more alive than I've felt in years." The tension in his shoulders eased, relief washing across his features. He raised one hand to cut my cheek, his touch gentle but sure. "Sophia," he murmured, my name a promise on his lips. When he kissed me, it was tender at first, a question, an offering. But as I responded, sliding my arms around his neck, the kiss deepened, years of restraint and loneliness falling away as we held each other in the fading light. Later, as we walked slowly back to the house, his arm steady around my waist, I glanced back at the glass studio gleaming in the moonlight. "Will you show me how to use oils?" I asked. "I've always worked in acrylics, but your landscapes, the depth you achieve," he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "I'd like that," he said. "And perhaps you could teach me how to capture emotion the way you do. We could learn from each other." As we reached the terrace, lights from the house spilling out to welcome us, I realized that was exactly what we'd been doing all along, learning from each other, changing each other in subtle ways, creating something new from the broken pieces of our separate lives. The future wouldn't be easy. Antonio's world would always contain elements of darkness. My independence and artistic integrity would always need to be preserved. But standing there in the circle of his arms, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again after my mother's death. After the accident that nearly claimed my life. Hope. Not the naive hope of fairy tales and perfect endings, but the mature hope that acknowledges difficulties and chooses to move forward anyway. The hope that sees beauty in complexity, strength in vulnerability, and possibility in the spaces between broken things. As Antonio opened the door, guiding me over the threshold and into the warmth of the house that was becoming our shared sanctuary, I knew with absolute certainty that I was where I belonged. Not despite who he was, but because of who we were together. "Welcome home, Sophia," he murmured against my hair, and I felt the last walls between us crumble into dust.